Trevor Stevenson, and welcome to Your Story Will Be Different. This is a narrative play podcast where I tell you the story that came to be from a playthrough of a solo tabletop role-playing game. For this session, we're playing Sentinel by Megan Cross, in which you are a solitary guardian charged with keeping a sanctuary safe. With that said, let's dive right in. Amidst a beautiful sea of stars and nebulae, a pristine white castle sat alone on a floating island. Walking the ramparts as he had done for eons before, the last sentinel of the castle began his usual patrol. He wore his time-worn and battle-tested armor. He had a sword on his hip and a shield on his back. As his boots echoed softly on marble floors, each step was a ritual of a duty older than some memories. Once this place had been filled with life. Sentinels, stewards, animals, gardens blooming with color and light. But now, only silence reigned. The others had gone, some by madness, some by grief, some by will. Only he remained, the last sentinel. He remembered back to when it all began, about 1,500 years ago, as he reckoned, in a time that felt more dream than memory at this point. Back then, the wizard Icat summoned the entire garrison to the great hall beneath the spire that held the Orb of Keston. The orb pulsed with power through the walls of the building. It was a raw, celestial, and dangerous object. Icat was desperate to protect it from his rival Morian, and had made a decision that would change everything. He stood tall and severe, and his staff glowed as he cast a spell to remove the castle from the regular flow of time and space.
This place will be a bastion beyond worlds. It must endure. You must endure.
And so they had. With a pulse of magic that radiated through the halls, through their bones, life changed forever. The island lifted from the soil of the earth and disappeared through a shimmering rift. The stars they knew vanished, replaced by a new cosmic ocean. The spell he had cast granted them agelessness. They no longer needed sleep, they no longer had hunger, and they would not decay. It did not protect them from loneliness, from sorrow, and the slow erosion of purpose. The castle remained, but the world within it faded. With time, the animals died, the plants withered, and the silence grew louder. One by one, his brother sentinels had broken. Some whispered to the void before stepping into it. Others screamed. His own captain, who had been brave and stoic, had been the very first to leap into nothingness. The sentinel remembered watching him fall into the stars. His sword left behind, and it rusted in the corner of the training yard. On one quiet patrol, the sentinel stumbled upon that very same sword. Almost lost to time, it had rusted and pitted. He picked it up and weighed its heft. It was heavier than he remembered. He set it beside the armor racks in the barracks. It was a silent memorial to the first lost brother. On another day, the sentinel found a mirrored locket behind a loose floor tile. Inside was a faded portrait, two women smiling. He remembered the locket's owner, a fellow sentinel who had worn it always, touching it before battle. She had spoken often of her wife. The memory stung, but it was gentle and painful. That locket, that love, it was a reminder that there had been lives before this place. That next patrol brought an introspective mood. He found himself thinking of how he had become captain. It had been centuries since the last of his commanders vanished into the void. He hadn't sought rank. It had come by attrition, by the collapse of all who stood above him. He remembered the ceremony, held alone in the Great Hall, where he lit a candle for each fallen soldier. In rare moments of peace, he remembered the early days, the laughter and feasts. The hall was filled with voices, clinking cups, and songs echoing through the walls out into the stars beyond. Birthdays were a sacred rite, a temporary balm to the monotony. He could almost taste the roasted meats and spiced wine, but they were ghosts now. A monstrous screech tore him from his thoughts. He ran towards the sound with his sword drawn. Winged creatures, metallic blue and glinting with strange energy, were roosting in the upper terraces. He shouted, and the creatures turned. Each of their 7 black eyes were void of empathy. He slashed at one, deflected another with his shield, but then an idea struck. He banged his sword against his shield, creating a cacophonous din. The creature shrieked and scattered, fleeing back into the stars. Time passed again. He noted something troubling. Books were beginning to go missing in the library. Whole shelves gone. He had been reading to keep his mind sharp. Now his sanctuary of thought was diminished. He searched, but found no trace of what took them. Then the insects came. Small, armored things with pincers and stingers. They arrived in a swarm, crawling out from cracks in the void itself like a living tide. Their carapaces clicked and shimmered under the starlight, their mandibles grinding against stone with a sound like dry leaves underfoot. They moved fast and chewed at the marble base of the walls, choosing to nest in its cracks. The Sentinel knew that these weren't going to be simple pests. They were colonizers, driven by an ancient instinct to consume and inhabit. He rushed to the kitchens and prepared a large pot of boiling water. He returned to find more of the creatures crawling over the gate. He hurled the steaming water across their ranks. Screeches erupted from the swarm as they boiled and writhed, curling into blackened husks. But he saw their numbers on the horizon. More writhing shadows creeping through the starfield. This was only the beginning. He knew they would return. In the empty space of the ransacked library, he found one book left behind. A fairy tale. Its cover was unassuming, bound in faded blue leather with silver filigree curling like vines around the edges. There was no title. Intrigued, the Sentinel opened it. The story began simply, as all fairy tales do. Once upon a time, in a castle adrift beyond the stars, lived a brave knight sworn to eternal watch. He bore sword and shield and walked alone through gleaming halls, guarding the last ember of the world's light. His hand was still frozen over the page. The language was innocent, almost childish, yet each word seemed to peel away a layer of his reality. The knight in the tale was ageless, untouched by hunger or sleep. He served a great sorcerer who had hidden the castle away from time to protect a mysterious orb. One by one, the knight's brothers and sisters fell. Some leapt into the stars, Others were lost to madness. He remained alone, loyal to his charge. The Sentinel's heart tightened as he turned the pages. There were mentions of strange winged beasts with 7 eyes, a rusted sword once wielded by a fallen captain, and a mirrored locket holding a memory of a life left behind, not to mention a swarm of stinging insects that had chewed at the castle's bones. Each event matched his own life with uncanny precision, echoes from recent memory, transcribed in ink. Further in, the tale described a great shadow that wore the faces of the knight's fallen kin, and later still, a monstrous-looking squid that wrapped its limbs around the keep, gnashing at it with a beak carved from obsidian. The final line of the fairy tale chilled him. As the brave knight, after centuries alone, finally stepped beyond the gate and vanished into the light, never to be seen again. He stared at the last page, the book on his lap, for hours. The ink seemed to shimmer under the flickering candlelight. He turned it over, half expecting to find a signature, his own perhaps, but there was nothing, just blank parchment. What was this? Prophecy? A forgotten myth? A cruel joke? Or was it his own story, written long ago, waiting to be read at just the right moment? One evening, as he wandered the halls lost in thought, the Sentinel paused before a section of the castle that bore strange markings. New runes, softly glowing, etched into the stone by unseen hands. He'd never seen them before, and yet they felt familiar, though ancient. He reached out to touch them, and the moment his fingers brushed the surface, a whisper echoed through his mind. It was faint and dissonant. It was like a distant voice carried on a forgotten wind.
Relief comes on steel feet. The watch shall shift again.
The words unsettled him. He stood still for a long time, staring at the runes, trying to decipher more. But the glow dimmed and faded, and the runes vanished as if they had never been there. That night, he could not sleep. Not from fatigue, for he did not require rest, but he was uneasy. The words clung to him like a premonition, gnawing at the corners of his mind. It was a puzzle piece that fit in with another puzzle piece of the fairy tale. But what did it all mean? The larger puzzle remained unknown. Another attack followed, a pack of undead wolves whose eyes were molten. They emerged from the void's mist, their howls warping the air with eerie resonance and concussion. Their voices were half-rotted, sinew stretching over exposed bone, ribs like rusted iron bars. The Sentinel stood firm as they charged at him. He swung his sword in broad arc, slicing through fur and bone alike, but the wolves did not die easily. Even when severed, their dismembered parts clawed forward. He fought with precision, driving them back step by step until he reached the bell tower. There, he rang the ancient warning bell, and the vibrations disrupted the necromantic binding that held the creatures together. One by one, they collapsed into ash and dust. The Sentinel knew that somewhere in the dark, the magic that animated them still stirred, plotting another return. A night came. Silent, armored, walking with purpose. The Sentinel hailed him, but the figure said nothing. There was something off about the way the knight moved. Stiff, uncanny, like a puppet on strings. The The sentinel raised his sword and approached cautiously, repeating his challenge. Still no response. The false knight drew a blade and charged. Their clash was violent and abrupt. Sparks flew as their swords met, echoing through the empty halls. The sentinel noticed irregularities in his opponent. This other knight's strength fluctuated unnaturally, and the sword strikes came with neither rhythm nor form. The sentinel struck a deep blow, and the knight staggered, convulsing. For a moment, the armor split, and what lay beneath was not flesh, but a writhing mass of sinewy black tendrils. The sentinel recoiled, horror blooming in his chest. The creature shrieked, and its form shedded the armor in twisted, spasmodic movements, revealing a grotesque shape. Tall, gaunt, it wore the faces of his fallen comrades, taunting him and whispering in their voices.
You are alone. They left you. You should have followed.
But the sentinel roared and lunged, driving a sword through its chest. It shrieked, crumbling in on itself, and burst into an oily vapor. The void swallowed what was left, but its final whisper lingered in the air like smoke.
We will return.
More time. More solitude. The sentinel drifted towards the magic tomes, studying quietly. He found he had a talent for it. Small spells at first, light, heat, some levitation, but he sensed there was more waiting for him, a power unused. The next day, a behemoth from the deep void came at the castle, a thing older than thought. It resembled a gleaming, glowing squid. It drifted slowly at first, tendrils gliding through the nebulae, until it lashed onto the outer walls of the keep. Its skin shimmered with phosphorescent runes, and its tentacles wrapped around entire towers, squeezing stone and iron with crushing force. Its central beak scraped against the walls, carving deep gouges into the stone. The sentinel mounted the highest battlement and fired a flaming signal to ignite the vat of oil he had prepared days before. The blaze spilled over the squid's slick hide, and the creature thrashed. Its tentacles lashed wildly, tearing loose banners and splintering gargoyles. With a roar, it disengaged and slipped back into the star sea, trailing smoke and flame in its wake. But the scars it left remained on what had been the pristine white tower. A year passed. Nothing came. No monsters, no sounds. Just stars and endless silence. One day the sentinel lost his shield. He dropped it into the void during a training exercise. He took up the rusted shield of Len, a comrade lost long ago to a carnivorous plant in the courtyard. The old shield felt right. It was heavy, honest, and full of memory to keep him grounded. The final day arrived without ceremony. Another knight approached, clad in armor much like his own. The sentinel watched as it approached, and he was wary. He challenged the figure to a fight, knowing that the shapeshifter would not respond. But this knight did not draw a blade. Instead, the approaching knight raised his hands in peace. "You are relieved." The sentinel stood silent. These words did not make sense. "I am the first of many. The garrison is to be replenished, and you are to return to the world."
"What world?"
the sentinel asked. "The one beyond the void. I must warn you that much time has passed, but the order remains. You are not forgotten." The sentinel's suspicion flared once again.
"Who sent you? Is this another trick?"
"Iket's successor. The watch persists, though not as it was. I was conscripted. It was my punishment for rebellion. Service instead of death is what Iket told me. But I bring more. You need not guard this place alone anymore." The sentinel stared at him. So many centuries of solitude. How could this truly be the end?
"I do not know the world you come from."
"Nor do I know the one you left. But we are kin now, by duty. You are relieved. Won't you go?" He looked out at the stars. For the first time in centuries, he found them beautiful again. Not lonely. Not endless. He nodded. The sentinel walked to the edge of the island where so many had jumped, but this time, he did not fall. He crossed the threshold into a portal of light, a doorway to the world beyond. And behind him, the stars continued to burn. But he was no longer their prisoner. I was drawn to Sentinel for a couple of reasons. One, it seems like a great bookend and counterpoint to how we started this season with 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. It is another version of the curse of immortality. In 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, you're basically a monster that is immune to the effects of time. And in this case, he is a man who's charged with duty and is held together by his responsibility. And one by one, he sees his fellow companions throw themselves into the void because they were unable to deal with this solitary lifestyle where nothing seems to change. And I would have to imagine from any kind of immortal's perspective that change is terrifying, but meaning is found through change. I know that there is a companion game called Sanctuary. If you're interested in this game and maybe want a little more, go check out Sanctuary, also by Megan Cross. Thank you for listening to Your Story Will Be Different. Thank you for listening to this whole season of Your Story Will Be Different. I couldn't do it without actual people listening to this, so thank you so much for your time and attention and all the positive things that people have been saying. I will say that this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but maybe it's the end of the beginning. I have racked up a very large queue of games, and last time I did an inventory of all the games that I'm interested in playing for this podcast, I think I have enough for at minimum 2 more seasons. And in point of fact, I'm maybe thinking about maybe launching a Patreon or something like that and doing some more of the long form things, some of the bigger games. I have a beautiful stack of all the books for Forbidden Lands sitting on my desk, and I don't want to say they're burning a hole in my pocket, but I am very eager to get going on that. But I also know that that's going to be a very long, continuous story. So that may be something I do on a Patreon at some point in the future. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to do that, as this is the season finale, and you'll be the first to know when season 3 rolls around later this year. You can find me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and X if you want to reach out and talk about TTRPGs or the podcast or anything that strikes your fancy. As always, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Sentinel by Megan Cross so that way you can see how your protector of a sanctuary deals with the solitude of being the last of their line. But just remember, your story will be different.